Okay, let's dive right in. Picture this. December 1995, the Washington Post makes this huge declaration. They name one single person as, get this, the most influential person in the history of the past 1,000 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's a massive claim when you think about everyone who lived and, shaped things over a whole millennium.
Exactly. A really bold statement. And the person they were actually talking about, Genghis Khan.
Right. The founder of what was, well, arguably the biggest single land empire the world saw in the Middle Ages. Absolutely enormous.
And that's our mission today. We're going to unpack the incredible story of Genghis Khan. We want to trace his whole journey, from these really quite brutal beginnings through his military genius, which is undeniable, and then explore some surprising ways his legacy, well, it still echoes today. It really shapes our world.
Yeah, it does.
We've looked at a lot of different sources for this old historical accounts, but also some pretty recent scientific studies, too. The idea is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding this really complex figure.
And hopefully show some details that maybe get missed in the standard history overview. He's a figure who definitely shaped global history in a unique way.
Okay, so let's start at the start. The rise of Temujin, that was his birth name, right? From being an outlaw to basically unifying the Mongol tribes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was born around 1162, and his early life was incredibly difficult. I mean, really tough. His father, Yushuke Bagatur, he was a tribal leader.
Right.
He died when Temujin was only about 9. That was 1171. Probably poisoned by rivals.
And that just threw the family into chaos, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Deep hardship. His half-brother, Bektar, took over. But then, well, there's this pretty shocking incident. Temujin and his full brother, Khazar, actually murdered Bektar.
Murdered him? Why?
It seems it was over a dispute about hunting spoils, but really it looks like it was about power, getting sole control. This act basically made them outlaws.
So they were kicked out of the tribe.
Completely banished. Rejected. They spent years just surviving as nomads, poor, sometimes even, eating rodents. It sounds grim, but you can see how that kind of experience would forge someone incredibly resilient, ruthless even.
It's hard to imagine that leading to Genghis Khan. But even then, he was making strategic moves, right? Like his marriage.
Yeah, he showed a knack for strategy early on. Around 16, he married Berta. But soon after, she was kidnapped by another tribe.
Oh, wow.
And Temujin, he didn't just give up. He got help from a local ruler, Chokhil, and actually managed to rescue her.
Okay, but there's a detail there about their first son, Jochi.
Ah, yes. That's intriguing. Jochi was born shortly after Berta returned from 9 months of captivity. The sources are pretty clear. They say it's certain that Temujin was not the father.
But he accepted him.
He did. Accepted him as his own son. It really shows how, back then, personal feelings often took a back seat to, political needs and keeping the family or tribe together.
So, despite all this hardship, this personal drama, he starts gaining influence.
He does. He had this steadfast personality, apparently, real leadership qualities. He started conquering nearby groups, gathering followers. By 1190 or so, he already controlled about half the Mongol tribes.
And then came the big moment.
Then came 1206, the Great Assembly, the Kurultai. This is where all the tribes came together, and they named him Genghis Khan.
Which means?
World ruler or universal ruler, basically the undisputed leader of all the Mongols. And he didn't waste any time. He immediately set up a written code of laws, the Yasak, and completely reorganized his armies.
And that reorganization, that was the key to what came next.
Absolutely. It created this incredibly effective fighting force that was about to, well, change the world map.
Yeah, let's talk about the scale of that change. The empire he built was just massive.
It really was breathtaking. You compare it to Alexander the Great or Napoleon, Genghis Khan's empire was much, much larger in terms of continuous land area. It stretched from China, right across Central Asia, into Eastern Europe, reaching the Danube River.
Didn't the Mongols get as far as Hungary?
They did, by 1241, yeah. Just about 15 years after Genghis Khan himself died. The momentum was incredible.
So how did they do it? What was the secret to their military success? It wasn't just numbers, was it?
No, not at all. Their military mastery was, well, groundbreaking. They had these amazing maneuvering tactics, the famous mounted archers, of course.
Right, the horse archers.
And a really efficient communication system.
Yeah.
They used torches, fast riders. They could coordinate armies across huge distances. But honestly, the really interesting part is how often their cleverness won the day, not just brute force.
Cleverness. Okay, give us an example. What's a really striking case of that?
Well, one classic example is the Battle of Liegnitz. That was in Poland, 1241. The Mongols were facing a much bigger European army, maybe 30,000 strong.
Okay.
So the Mongol vanguard kind of pretended to charge, then retreated, luring the European knights into a trap. Standard tactic for them. But then they used smoke screens, and survivors talked about poisonous, stinking smoke, loud bangs, and flashes of
That
fire.
don't help.
It certainly sounds like it.
Mhm.
Most historians think this is probably the first time gunpowder and maybe even primitive grenades were used in a European battle, a whole century before it became common.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Talk about a technological edge, or at least a tactical one.
Exactly. They were willing to innovate, to use whatever worked. It shows a really forward-thinking approach to war.
Okay, what else? I've heard a story about cats and birds.
Ah, the Volohai legend, yes,
Uh,
from 1209. It's a famous one, though we should say it's disputed. The story only really popped up centuries later in the 17th century.
but what's the story?
Well, Genghis Khan is besieging this city, Volohai.
Right.
It's dragging on. So supposedly, he tells the city leaders he'll lift the siege if they just give him 10,000 swallows and 1,000 cats.
Strange request.
Right. The leaders think, okay, weird but harmless. So they round up the animals. But then Khan has his men tie pieces of cloth soaked in oil to the animals' tails, sets them on fire,
No.
and releases them. The terrified animals flee back into the city, which was largely built of wood, setting fires everywhere.
Oh my God. Whether it's true or not, that's quite the image.
Exactly. True or not, it really cemented his reputation for being ruthlessly cunning. It became part of the legend, part of the psychological warfare.
And that psychological edge seems key. What about the Mukden surprise? 1212.
Another brilliant example. The people of Mukden were celebrating New Year, actually outside the city walls. They thought the Mongol army was miles away, like 150 kilometers, a totally safe distance.
But it wasn't.
Not at all. Khan ordered a forced march. His soldiers covered that distance in just 24 hours.
Wow.
They arrived to find the city basically empty and just walked in. Perfect execution. It tells you a lot about their discipline, their speed, and their intelligence gathering.
So this combination of speed, surprise, psychology, innovation,
Yeah.
how did this challenge the way wars were usually fought back then?
It fundamentally changed the game. European and Middle Eastern armies were often based on heavy cavalry, sieges, set-piece battles. The Mongols used mobility, intelligence, fear. They often won before the main battle even started. They made themselves seem almost supernatural, invincible.
And these tactics fueled major conquests, right? Can you remind us of the key campaigns?
Sure, it really kicked off with the campaign against the Xixia kingdom starting around 1205. Then came the invasion of the Jin dynasty in northern China, capturing their capital, Yanqing, that's modern Beijing, by 1215.
Okay.
Then they turned west, easily conquering huge swaths of Central Asia between 1219 and 1220. By 1221, they were hitting the borders of Europe, and that led to the Battle of the Kalka River in Ukraine in 1223, a major victory against Russian princes led by his top generals, Jabei and Subutai.
So this incredible run of success, but how did it end for Genghis Khan herself? Let's talk about his death.
Right, the end of the legend. He died in 1227. He was actually on campaign again against a Western Chia, the same kingdom he'd first attacked years before.
Do you know how he died?
Well, that's the mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of history's great unknowns. There are several stories. Maybe a fall from his horse during a hunt. Some sources say illness or just old age. He was in his 60s. Others claim he was killed in battle or maybe even assassinated by a captured Tangut princess. We just don't know for sure.
And the mystery doesn't stop there, right? His burial is also shrouded in secrecy.
Completely. The story goes that his funeral procession killed everyone and everything they encountered on the way back to Mongolia to keep the location secret.
Everyone.
Everyone, humans, animals, to wipe the path clean, essentially. There's even this poignant detail from a Chinese text about a baby camel being buried near his grave.
A baby camel? Why?
So its mother would remember the spot and could lead people back later if needed. It just adds to this whole aura of intentional secrecy. They really, really didn't want anyone to find it.
So the big mausoleum in Inner Mongolia, that's not actually his tomb.
No, that's a memorial, a cenotaph.
Yeah.
His actual burial place has never been found. There was some excitement back in 2004. They thought they found his palace, which made people think the tomb might be nearby.
Right.
And then in 2014, that huge crowdsourcing project where thousands of people scanned satellite images.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
They spent something like 30,000 hours looking for anomalies, and they did identify 55 potential archaeological sites.
Yeah.
But still, no confirmed grave of Genghis Khan. It remains hidden.
And it's crucial to remember his death didn't stop the expansion, did it?
Not at all. The Mongol war machine kept rolling. His sons and grandsons pushed outwards.
Hmm.
You see Kiev fall in 1240, Krakow in Poland in 1241, the sack of Baghdad in 1258, Aleppo in 1259. The empire continued to grow for decades after him.
It's like he unleashed something that just couldn't be stopped easily.
Exactly. He didn't just build an empire. He set in motion forces that reshaped continents long after he was gone.
Okay, so let's connect this to today. How does this figure from, 800 years ago still matter? It seems he does in some really surprising ways. Globalization, for instance.
Yeah, it's a fascinating argument. Historians like Paul Buell and especially Jack Weatherford make a strong case that Genghis Khan's conquests essentially smashed down barriers between East Asia and the Western world. They created this vast zone of trade and communication across Eurasia,
So, like the first version of globalization.
kind of a pre-modern globalization,
Yeah.
yes. Weatherford has this powerful quote. Let me see. He says, "The Mongol age is now considered a critical period in world history, and the Mongol conquerors the creators of the first globalization and thus the inventors of the modern world.
Wow.
Genghis Khan's conquests truly marked the beginning of our world. History might have been entirely different without him. We might be entirely different without him."
That's a really profound thought, that our interconnected world might have its roots, however uncomfortably, in his campaigns.
It's a challenging idea, but one historians take seriously. And the connection gets even more, well, personal when you look at genetics.
Ah, the genetic footprint. Tell us about that 2003 study.
Right. This was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics. An international team found a specific marker on the Y chromosome, which passes directly from father to son, pretty much unchanged.
Okay.
They found the same marker in about 8% of men living within the borders of the former Mongol Empire.
8%. That's a lot.
It translates to roughly 0.5% of all men on Earth today. That's something like 16 million men sharing this paternal lineage.
And how do they link this to Genghis Khan?
The timing and distribution are key. The genetic diversity within this lineage suggests it started spreading about 1,000 years ago, plus or minus a few centuries, which lines up perfectly with Genghis Khan and his immediate descendants.
Okay.
And this specific Y chromosome marker is incredibly common among the Hazara people in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
And they have traditions linking them to Mongol warriors, right?
Exactly. They've traditionally claimed descent from Mongol soldiers who settled there. So the genetics seems to back up the oral history.
Which led to headlines calling Genghis Khan like the most successful father in history.
Pretty much. The most prolific lover, things like that. Now, obviously, we can't be 100% certain it's his specific Y chromosome without finding his remains and testing them.
Right, the missing grave again.
But the circumstantial evidence is strong. Think about it. His oldest son, Jochi, the one with the uncertain paternity, reportedly had 40 sons himself.
40.
Yeah. And historical texts mention that raping women in conquered territories was unfortunately seen as part of a soldier's reward. The Khans themselves would have had, first choice and vast harems.
Like his grandson, Kublai Khan.
Precisely. Kublai Khan, who ruled China, had 22 legitimate sons, and there are reports he added 30 new young women to his harem every single year. So the sheer potential for this ruling lineage to spread its genes was enormous.
It's just amazing how science keeps bumping into his legacy. That 2003 study basically found this massive family tree originating around 1200 and had to ask, could this ancestor be Genghis Khan?
It's a compelling question based on the data. It really highlights his impact not just politically or militarily, but biologically, stretching right down to the present day.
So wrapping this up, we've gone from Temujin, the outcast kid eating rodents, to Genghis Khan, the world ruler, the architect of this immense empire. We've seen his military genius, the clever tactics, the psychological warfare.
And the enduring mysteries surrounding his death and burial, which only add to his legendary status.
And then we touched on these modern echoes, the idea that he kickstarted globalization and this incredible genetic legacy potentially linking him to millions of people walking around today.
It's quite a story, spanning centuries and disciplines.
It really is. Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. We still don't know exactly how Genghis Khan died. We definitely don't know where he's buried. What does this enduring mystery, this massive historical figure with these huge unknowns still attached to him, tell us about history itself?
That's interesting. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other major figures from the past might have hidden stories, unexamined impacts? If we uncovered those, could it completely change how we see our own world and how it came to be?
Something to think about.